party where everything changed. She wasn't supposed to be there. He wasn't supposed to talk to her that way. And the room was never supposed to know what happened after midnight. But they did, and nothing was ever the same again. High above Hollywood Hills, there was a house that glittered brighter than the city below. Inside, senators laughed with studio heads. Former spies whispered in corners. Stars twinkled in cocktail dresses. And one woman glided through the room like a dream made of velvet and secrets. Marilyn Monroe. But tonight, she wasn't performing. She wasn't the blonde bombshell on screen or the object of millions' desire. Tonight, she was Norma Jean, curious, cracked, craving something real. And across the room stood the most dangerous man in America, John F. Kennedy. The smile that could win wars without a shot fired. His presence pulled people in like gravity. But that night, his focus narrowed to one woman. He handed her a glass of champagne and said, "To the most beautiful legend in Hollywood, and to the part of her story no one's written yet." She laughed, not the breathy, rehearsed kind. This was deeper, nervous, unreadable, and in that moment, the air changed. Everyone else faded. There was just Marilyn and Jack. Hours slipped by. Midnight crept in like a thief. Marilyn found herself barefoot on the lawn, walking through moonlight like it was made for her. Her gown clung to the grass, and her thoughts wandered into forbidden territory. Then, a whisper behind her. Norma. Only a handful of people ever called her that. She turned. Robert Kennedy. Bobby, Jack's brother. His opposite in every way. Quieter, sharper, heavier with worry. He stepped closer, the shadows clinging to him. "You shouldn't be here," he said softly. "This place is not a game." "I'm an actress, Bobby," she replied, "but I'm no one's puppet." He held her gaze, and for a moment, the noise from the house felt miles away. In that silence, something fragile passed between them, warning maybe, or prophecy. Back inside, Jack stood at the upstairs window, pulling the curtain back just enough to watch her. Their eyes met one final time. One silent exchange. One unspoken vow. Or maybe a farewell. That night, it wasn't just laughter and champagne that filled the house. Deals were whispered, allegiances tested, and a woman became a threat just by knowing too much. From that moment on, Marilyn was no longer just Hollywood's golden girl. She was a secret, a symbol, a risk, and secrets never stayed buried for long. The president's favorite call. It was always the phone that gave her away. Not the cameras, not the headlines, not even the men she let into her guarded world. It was the phone, the late-night ringing that sliced through the silence like a scalpel, peeling away the illusion she worked so hard to build. August nights in Brentwood were hot and quiet, the kind of quiet that made a person believe no one was watching. But Marilyn never really believed that. Her home had windows that faced the street and blinds she never fully trusted. The air was thick with perfume and secrets. She hadn't slept well in weeks. When the phone rang at 2:17 a.m., she didn't flinch. She just rolled onto her side, picked it up with a slow hand, and whispered into the darkness, "Hello?" A pause. The faint click of a secured line. Then his voice. "Hey, baby, you still awake?" John F. Kennedy, the President of the United States. But in that moment, not a leader of the free world, just Jack. Just the man who once told her she was the only one who saw him without the armor. Her voice softened. "I am now." She walked to the window as she spoke, the receiver tangled in the fingers of one hand, the other drawing the curtain aside. Outside, the moon lit the garden in silver. Her bare feet touched cold tiles. She didn't shiver. This conversation, like too many before it, felt like walking a tightrope strung over a chasm she was forbidden to name. He told her he missed her laugh, that he hated sleeping in that house full of duty and silence, that sometimes, when the world felt too heavy, all he wanted was to hear her voice. It should have felt romantic, but it didn't. Something in his tone was different tonight. Tighter, like the line between them wasn't just physical anymore. Like there were other ears listening, and maybe they didn't belong to either of them. She asked about Bobby. Jack paused. She mentioned the night at Bing Crosby's estate, the name she overheard, the topic she wasn't supposed to hear. Cuba missiles Hoover, something called Operation Baylight. Jack didn't answer right away. Instead, he said, "You weren't meant to be there." "I know," she whispered, "but I was, and I remember everything." The silence that followed was not one of comfort. It was one of calculation. He told her she was special, that she had to be careful, that not everyone in Washington saw her the way he did. She didn't need him to say it out loud. She already knew there had been signs. The car parked down the block too many nights in a row. The phone clicks. The anonymous envelopes that arrived with no stamps. And now, the sound of fear in a man's voice who once called himself fearless. That night, after they hung up, she sat on the edge of her bed for a long time, holding the receiver like it was still warm. She didn't cry. She didn't panic. Instead, she picked up a pen and scribbled in her diary. Jack called. Different tonight. Strange. Afraid. I said too much. I think he did. Too. We're not alone anymore. She tore out the page, folded it tightly, and slid it into the hollow space behind the mirror in her vanity, one of many hiding spots. By morning, she would find a note slipped under her door. No envelope, no name. Stop talking. Please, before it's too late. She didn't show it to anyone, but she didn't throw it away either. Over the next week, the calls slowed down, and then they stopped. No more midnight whispers. No more half-truths disguised as affection. Just silence. She called back once. The number was disconnected. That day, she left her house in dark sunglasses and went to her safety deposit box. She left a manila folder with taped conversations, photos, a written statement, and a letter to her lawyer. If I'm found dead, know that I didn't fall asleep peacefully. Still, she hoped the phone would ring again, that somehow Jack would explain everything. The fear, the distance, the silence. It did ring. One last time. She answered it breathlessly. But it wasn't him. The voice was male, calm, and final. "Miss Monroe, the story ends here. Be remembered for your beauty, not for your questions." And then a dial tone. She held the receiver for a long time, letting the sound of nothing fill the space where love used to live. For the first time in years, Marilyn Monroe felt something colder than betrayal. She felt erased. The list she wasn't supposed to see. Some things you see by accident. Others, you were never meant to survive seeing. The document wasn't hidden. That's what chilled her the most. It was resting casually on the nightstand, beneath an ashtray and a pair of reading glasses, as if it belonged there, as if it wasn't laced with power and danger, as if it wasn't the kind of paper that could end a life, or several. Marilyn hadn't been snooping. She wasn't that kind of woman. At least, not until life made her one. But that night, in the low golden light of the Palm Springs villa, when Jack had stepped out to take a secure call by the pool, she'd reached for her lipstick and noticed a corner of the envelope sticking out from under the leather portfolio. It wasn't marked confidential or top secret. It didn't have to be. Its weight was enough. When she opened it, the air shifted. 2 pages. Names she didn't recognize. Codes she didn't understand. Locations she couldn't pronounce. But she understood what it meant. A list of operatives. Embedded sources. Diplomats who weren't diplomats. Strings tied to Cuba, to Laos, to Moscow. And on the last line, bold, handwritten, circled 3 times, the word Norma, not Marilyn. Norma, her real name, the one she hadn't used in years. The one only 2 people in Washington ever dared to speak aloud. She folded the paper quickly and placed it back exactly where she found it. But the panic didn't go away. It settled into her chest like a ticking clock. When Jack came back inside, he kissed her cheek and poured another drink. She pretended nothing had changed, but everything had. Back in Brentwood, she couldn't sleep for nights. She started checking the locks 3 times before bed. She burned the photo. She wrote notes to herself in code. She stopped calling Bobby, stopped taking pills to sleep, started writing again, not poems, but names, snippets of conversations, exact phrases she remembered from dinners she was never supposed to be invited to. She started keeping 2 diaries, one hidden beneath the mattress, the other she left in plain sight, filled with harmless reflections, fake dreams, and celebrity gossip. A decoy. By late August, the fear had turned to obsession. Every voice outside became a potential tale. Every click on the phone line was confirmation. She began to memorize license plates, spotted the same Buick twice in 3 days, began keeping her curtains closed in the daylight. Her therapist told her she was spiraling. She laughed in his face. "Doctor," she said, "paranoia is when you think people are watching you. I know they are." One afternoon, she received a delivery with no return label. A box. Inside, a copy of the New York Times, an unlabeled cassette tape, and a note. "Play this alone. Then decide what you are." She waited until sunset, drew the blinds, locked the door, lit a candle. When she pressed play, she heard her own voice. From weeks ago, in bed, with Jack. "I saw the list," she whispered on the tape. "I know what you're planning. I know what you've done." Then his voice. "You have no idea what you've just invited into your life, Norma." She slammed the stop button, breathing hard, heart racing. The tape didn't just prove she was being recorded. It proved she was being studied, framed, prepared for something. That night, she made copies of the tape, sent them to 3 people in 3 different cities, included only one message with each. "If I go quiet, make noise." She began calling people she hadn't spoken to in years. Journalists, ex-lovers, actors, old allies from forgotten parties. She hinted at a story, said she was writing something important, said it wasn't about fame this time. It was about truth. Most of them didn't believe her. Some smiled politely. One offered her a movie deal. Another told her to get help. Only one man, a former studio fixer named Leo Katz, took her seriously. "I've cleaned up after a lot of people in this town, sweetheart," he said over the phone. "But if the people you're talking about are really watching you, then no one's going to clean up after you." She asked him to meet. He said he couldn't. The next day, she read in the papers that Leo had died of his sudden cardiac arrest while driving on Sunset Boulevard. She didn't cry. The next week, she found the front door of her home wide open. Nothing missing, nothing broken, but her mattress had been moved. Her decoy diary was gone, and a new one she hadn't written, had been placed in its place. She opened it. Every page was filled, handwriting nearly identical to hers. Stories of affairs, erratic behavior, emotional instability, suicide threats. Each entry a trap, a future obituary written in her own voice. It wasn't just surveillance anymore. It was erasure. It was rehearsal for her death. That night, she went to the beach alone. She walked along the shoreline until the water touched her knees. The moon above her was full, and the waves were cold. She screamed once, just to hear her voice echo against something real. Then she whispered, "I wasn't supposed to see that list, but now I can't unsee it." And somewhere, someone wrote that down. The rehearsal for her death. They didn't just plan how she would die. They rehearsed how we would remember her. The room was cold that morning, not from the weather, but from the way it was arranged. The sheets too tight, the pill bottles too neat. The phone knocked off the receiver as if by accident. It was a story, not a scene. A script, not a tragedy. And it hadn't even happened yet. Marilyn stood at the center of her bedroom, staring at the setup like an actress on a soundstage before the director called action. The only problem was no one ever yelled cut. No one ever asked her how she wanted the story to end. She had found the forged diary the week before. Page after page of words she didn't write but could have. The entries painted her as unstable, unpredictable, obsessed with the president. There were mentions of threats she hadn't made, fantasies she'd never had, heartbreaks she hadn't voiced. The handwriting was close enough to pass. That diary wasn't for her. It was for the papers, for the headlines that would come after her breath stopped, for the public that would mourn her the way they were told to. She held it in her hands, trembling, then dropped it to the floor like something venomous. Her body shivered, but her voice didn't. "They're writing my ending," she said out loud to no one, before I've had a chance to live it. She began noticing things that weren't there before. The maid suddenly replaced. The gardener, always too close to the windows. The same car parked outside her home for hours without moving, and that shadow that lingered in the hallway mirror when she passed. She told herself it was stress, that she was slipping, but then she found the script. It was tucked into a manila envelope at the back of her mail stack. No postmark, no label, just her name. Inside, a 6-page document titled Crisis Control Plan, MM Final Phase. It read like a movie treatment. Page 1, Public Reaction Protocol. Page 2, Timeline of Decline, Emotional plus Behavioral. Page 3, Predicted Reaction from White House, Deny and Delay. Page 4, Final Day Sequence, Proposed Overdose, Sleep Aid plus Alcohol. Page 5, Public Statement Draft. Page 6, Contingency Option, Housekeeper Discovery plus Delayed Ambulance Call. Her name wasn't written as a person. It was written as a risk, a variable, a threat to national stability. Marilyn folded the pages slowly, tears falling but unnoticed. Her hands moved like a woman preparing for her own burial. That night, she burned the papers in her bathtub, watched them curl and vanish into smoke. She told herself it would stop, that someone, somewhere, would come to her door and say this was all a mistake. No one came. She began rehearsing her own version of the ending, just in case. Left notes in shoes, letters hidden in hollow walls, scribbled truths in red lipstick on the back of mirrors, names, dates, the location of the original list, the names of the men who delivered the fake pills, the number that called her once, but was never listed in any directory. Every night, she lay in bed and imagined the call, the one where a calm voice would tell the world she had been found, that she was gone, that she was troubled. She knew the phrases already. She struggled in silence. She was loved by many but felt alone. She mixed medications. It was an accident. No mention of Jack. No mention of Bobby. No mention of Cuba or Hoover or wiretaps or the word Norma scribbled at the bottom of a CIA report. One evening, she called Peter Lawford, a voice she thought she could still trust. "Peter," she said, "they've already decided how I'll die." He didn't respond right away. Then carefully, "You're tired, Marilyn. Maybe you should take some time away. Go to the coast. Rest." She laughed once, bitter and short. From what, Peter? The truth. 3 days later, she found her will have been refiled. She hadn't touched it in months. And yet, her lawyer told her he had received an updated copy. Not from her. Her assets, quietly redirected. Her real notebooks, gone. A press release draft, already written. She was watching her own obituary being prepared in real time. And the part that terrified her most? She didn't know the ending yet, but they did. On August 2nd, she gave one final interview to a freelance reporter named Myra Hansen. An hour-long session that was never published. In it, she said, "If anything happens to me, tell them I knew. Tell them I wasn't crazy. Tell them I saw the page. Tell them I knew I was being erased one line at a time." Myra kept the tape, hid it for decades. It was found in 1998 in a shoebox labeled simply, "Don't forget her." Marilyn spent her last week rehearsing how to survive a story she didn't write. She rehearsed how to hide the original tapes, how to lock away the real diary, how to speak in code in case someone was always listening. But there are some endings you can't rewrite. Only delay, only mourn, and even that, only in silence. The silence that. There's a kind of silence that doesn't feel empty. It feels rehearsed, engineered, installed. The kind of silence that fills a space where a woman's name used to be. And for Marilyn Monroe, that silence began long before she died. It began the moment she started asking questions that weren't meant to have answers. It began when her calls stopped getting returned, when the men who once praised her lips now feared what might come out of them, when her name started showing up in government files, not film scripts. In the last days of her life, Marilyn became quieter, not because she had nothing to say, but because saying it meant risking everything. Her home became her prison, her phone became her weapon, and her memory became her burden. She began noticing how often her name disappeared from plans she had once been part of. Studio contracts canceled, public appearances postponed indefinitely, invitations withdrawn without explanation. Photographers who once followed her now walked past her. Headlines that used to scream her name now wrote it in past tense. She felt herself fading before the world even knew she was dying. Her conversations became shorter. She spoke less to her housekeeper, less to her friends. Even her dog sensed a shift, following her from room to room, waiting for the voice that used to fill the air with songs and laughter and late-night whispers of impossible dreams. But that voice was growing quieter, not by choice, by design. One afternoon, she stood in front of her mirror and tried to say her full name out loud. Norma Jean Mortensen. It sounded like someone else. She tried again. Marilyn Monroe. It echoed in the room like a ghost, beautiful, hollow, gone. On August 3rd, she received one final call from a number she didn't recognize. A man's voice. Calm, cold, you've had your moment. Now it's time to let the story end. She hung up without replying. But something inside her knew this wasn't a threat. It was a schedule. That night, she took out her real diary. Not the fake one they planted, not the decoy in the drawer. The real one, hidden behind the heating vent in her closet. She wrote a single line. They replaced my voice with silence. But the truth is still somewhere in the room. She tore out the page, kissed it, and lit it on fire. Not to destroy it, but to release it. Marilyn called Bobby one last time. Or at least, tried to. She reached the secretary. Then another. Then a line that rang endlessly. Then a man answered. Not Bobby. Not Jack. Just a voice. You were warned. Click. That was the last call she ever made. The next morning, she walked the perimeter of her house slowly. Room by room, object by object. She turned over photo frames, tore pages from old scripts, emptied bottles of perfume into the sink. She unplugged her phone. She stood in the center of her bedroom, as if waiting for a director to say, ready? But no one did, because this wasn't a movie. This was a rehearsal for a silence that would last half a century. 3 days later, the news broke. Marilyn Monroe found dead in Brentwood home. Apparent overdose. Age 36. The silence had officially begun. No mention of the list. No mention of the tapes. No mention of the president. Just pills, rumors, and an old narrative that everyone could agree on. She was beautiful. She was broken. She was alone. And that was safer for them. But silence is never permanent. It festers. It leaks. It waits for someone brave enough to ask. What if she wasn't broken? What if she was silenced? What if the truth never died? It just went underground. And maybe, just maybe, the silence that followed her name was never an ending. It was a pause, waiting for someone, anyone, to press play. What the tape recorder heard. The world heard the news, but the tape recorder heard the truth. Long before the reporters arrived, before the flashing cameras, before the world mourned the loss of a Hollywood icon, a small reel-to-reel machine sat in the corner of a quiet room in Brentwood, spinning, listening. It had no name, no face, no motive, only a red light that blinked in the dark. And what it captured, no one was ever supposed to hear. In the final 48 hours of Marilyn Monroe's life, the tape recorder heard everything. It heard her sob at 3:11 a.m., alone, barefoot, pacing the tile floor. It heard her whisper to herself, "They're coming soon. I can feel it." It heard her reading aloud from a crumpled page of a letter, torn in half, rewritten, then destroyed again. It heard her call herself by her birth name. It heard her call Jack by his. It heard the tremble in her voice as she repeated, over and over, "I don't want to disappear. I don't want to vanish." And then it heard them. The door didn't slam. It opened with precision. Voices, low, clipped professional. Not angry, not loud. The kind of voices that knew this wasn't a confrontation. It was a conclusion. They spoke to her by name, not with aggression, but with cold, orchestrated calm. "Miss Monroe, this is not personal. We're here for your protection." She laughed bitterly. Protection from what? From the truth? From memory? They asked where the tapes were. She said nothing. They asked again. Firmer. She replied, "You already have everything you need. You just haven't figured out how to bury it yet." The recorder caught a shift in the room. A chair scraped. A glass fell. And then silence. Not the absence of sound, but the thick, humming kind. The one that arrives right before something irreversible. A second voice spoke. Colder. Older. "You made it too real, Marilyn. They believed you." She replied, her voice strained, "Because I told the truth." The reply came like a verdict. "And now the truth will rest with you." The next sounds were mechanical. Movement, drawer opening, liquid being poured. A capsule bottle clinking against porcelain. Then footsteps. Then breathing, slower, fainter. Then nothing. At 4:43 a.m., the tape clicked off. Automatically, the red light went dark. What happened after that was rewritten. The official report said overdose. The newspaper said troubled star. The White House said nothing. But the tape had already heard the real ending. What they didn't know was that Marilyn had already made a copy. She had mailed it to a journalist, one she once trusted, one who'd been blacklisted, exiled, forgotten. A woman named Evelyn Crane. Fired from 2 papers, jailed for refusing to reveal sources, erased from history. Evelyn didn't go to the press. She went underground. And for 40 years, the tape stayed hidden in a safety deposit box labeled Property of Norma Jean. In 2003, Evelyn's niece found it. She was cleaning out her aunt's apartment after her death. Tucked behind a stack of dusty records and rejection letters, she found the box. Inside, a small envelope. A note. "Don't listen to this unless you believe she mattered." It took her 2 weeks to gather the courage. She played it, and when she did, she cried for a woman she'd never met. That tape never aired. It was too dangerous, too real. It confirmed what some had always suspected, that Marilyn Monroe hadn't died because she was fragile. She died because she was powerful, because she remembered, because she saw the wrong page at the wrong time, and because silence was easier to control than truth. The tape still exists, but it remains sealed. Some say it's locked away in a vault. Others believe it's in the hands of a journalist, waiting for the right moment. A few believe it was destroyed, burned to protect the very empire that once adored her. But those who heard it, those who really heard it, they know Marilyn never overdosed on pills. She overdosed on secrets. Norma's final message. She knew she wouldn't be heard in life, so she left behind a message for the after. Not for the public, not for the press, but for the girl she used to be. The one who still believed fame could fill a wound. The one who thought love meant safety. The one who didn't yet understand that beauty was currency, and that it could be stolen like anything else. That girl's name was Norma Jean. And Marilyn's last message was for her. In the final 24 hours of her life, Marilyn was more lucid than anyone expected. She wasn't drugged. She wasn't weeping. She wasn't unraveling. She was working, writing, organizing, speaking into a small handheld recorder she had hidden beneath the bathroom sink, one she bought months ago after she caught a man following her on Melrose. She recorded 6 separate audio notes, each labeled with a single word: love, power, silence, fear, truth, goodbye. No one knows what happened to the first 5, but the last one, goodbye, was recovered. It wasn't a suicide note. It wasn't a confession. It was a reflection, a reckoning, a quiet act of rebellion. Her voice on the tape was low, barely above a whisper. They think they've written my ending, but they don't know the story. She spoke for 23 minutes. Calm, composed. She spoke about Jack, about the way he made her feel invincible, then invisible. She spoke about Bobby, about the way he looked at her, not like an actress, not like a threat, but like a problem to be solved quietly. She spoke about the list. The first time I saw it, I thought I was dreaming, but it was real. My name wasn't at the top. It was at the bottom, in ink, underlined, like a reminder. She spoke about being followed, about the voice that warned her, about the room that smelled of her perfume before she ever walked in, about the mirrors that reflected things that weren't hers. And then she said the one sentence that would echo for decades. If you find this, and I'm already gone, then please don't let them write me as broken. I wasn't broken. I was interrupted. That message, stored on a dusty old cassette, was found by a woman named Celia Ross. Celia was a graduate student writing a thesis on the feminine mask in 20th century cinema. She wasn't looking for scandal. She wasn't even a Marilyn fan. She just happened to be in the right archive on the right day when the right box was opened. Inside the tape, a letter and a photograph, not of Marilyn but of Norma Jean, laughing, freckled, free. Celia listened to the tape 57 times. Then she stopped writing her thesis and started telling the truth. She interviewed everyone still alive who had known Marilyn. She traveled across 6 countries. She was sued twice, threatened once, offered a deal to disappear. She didn't, because she had heard the message, not just the words, the soul of it. And what was that message? It wasn't about politics. It wasn't even about the Kennedys. It was about what happens to women who know too much. It was about what the world does to a voice like hers. A voice that was never meant to speak, only to sing, only to seduce, only to smile on command. But she spoke anyway, and they called her crazy. She remembered everything, and they called her hysterical. She tried to save herself, and they called her doomed. Before the tape ends, there's a pause. Then Marilyn says quietly, almost too softly to hear, "I was never blonde. I was always the fire beneath it." And then the click of the stop button. Not silence, closure. Celia kept the message secret for 10 years. She said the world wasn't ready. Maybe it still isn't. But someday, someone will play that tape aloud. And when they do, Marilyn's story won't end with a rumor, or a pill bottle, or a tabloid headline. It will end with her voice, telling the world one final time, "My name was Norma, and I was never yours to bury." The truth didn't die with her. They thought the story ended when her breathing stopped. They thought the world would move on. They thought the silence would hold. But they were wrong, because the truth didn't die with Marilyn Monroe. It was buried, briefly, then it began to rise. Years passed, then decades. Her name faded into nostalgia. A face on posters, a dress in a museum, a voice replayed in commercials. They made her a brand, so they could forget the woman. But there were always cracks. People who remember the odd phone calls, the quiet settlements, the altered autopsy photos, the names removed from visitor logs, the diary pages that didn't match her handwriting, the script of a life carefully edited frame by frame. For years, no one dared to connect the dots, because connecting them would mean one thing, that Marilyn Monroe hadn't just died, she had been disappeared, not in body, but in memory, in meaning. Then came the leak, a cassette tape, mailed anonymously to a small, independent radio station in Detroit. The note said only, for the night she never got to finish. The host, a 29-year-old woman named Alia Morgan, didn't know what she was holding. She played it live, uncut, unfiltered. It was Marilyn's voice, soft, clear, furious, alive. For the first time, millions heard the words. They used my smile to sell silence. But I remember everything. I remember the men in suits, the red phone, the name on the envelope. I remember the moment I stopped being a woman and became a liability. Phones rang off the hook. The station was pulled off air 2 hours later. The FCC issued no explanation, but the audio was already online, already downloaded, already eternal. Suddenly, everything shifted. Old journalists came out of hiding. A retired FBI technician confirmed her name was on an internal risk report labeled Actress X. A former White House secretary admitted to destroying 3 tapes under instruction. An LAPD officer anonymously leaked a second autopsy photo showing bruising never mentioned in the report. And then came the 3rd tape, the one no one expected. It was shorter, only 2 minutes, a conversation, garbled, but clear enough to hear one devastating line. If she talks, we all go down. The speaker, identified as Robert F. Kennedy. The silence that had lasted 60 years exploded in a single night. Headlines changed. History cracked. And for the first time in modern American memory, Marilyn Monroe wasn't a tragedy. She was a warning. Universities began reopening sealed archives. Documentaries were re-edited. A congressional hearing was quietly suggested, then quietly buried. But it didn't matter, because by then the story had been told. Not the tabloid version, not the candlelight vigil version. The real one, the one Marilyn had left behind, not in fame, but in fragments, not in stardom, but in shadow. They tried to make her a myth. She became a martyr. They tried to call her weak. She became a weapon. They tried to own her story. She took it back. And so, in the final second of her legacy, not the life they sculpted, but the truth she screamed into silence, all that remains is a voice, not singing, not seducing, just telling you with eyes wide open, I was not crazy. I was not lost. I was not broken. I was just too awake in a world that needs women to sleep. And when the world listens, really listens, they'll hear it too. Marilyn Monroe didn't die in that room. They just couldn't silence Norma Jean fast enough.